What advice would you give an emerging insight professional who's in that era and he has to actually look at the insights in a different way altogether?
When do I buy a shampoo on Quick Com versus when do I buy it from a modern trade versus when do I buy it from general trade? For that, you need insights which are equally powerful and for the business as well. So you exist because of the consumer. So if you need to understand what need she has and how best can I satisfy that need is why you need consumer insights in the first place, because your business is based on that.
Was that the gap that, it got filled because of this book and the citation that you have within the book?
There should be some spotlight on insights professionals as well. Or if you're a marketer, then you need to know what is it that, insights people actually do and how do they produce the insight.
As a traditional researcher, I would always believe that, the behavioral content would give you, or the insights would give you better approach to understand your consumer than just defining a consumer persona.
Annoyingly enough, the behavior of two very different personas in terms of consumption, purchase and consumption of a category might be very similar.
What if consumer centricity wasn't just a buzzword, but the backbone of every decision your organization made? In this episode of the Collaborative Canvas, we unpack what it really means to build an insightful organization, one where data becomes direction and consumer understanding fuels competitive advantage. Joining me is Manish Makhijani, a true industry heavyweight who lived and led insights across continents. As a CEO of the Hygiene Care division at RSPL Group, a former global CMI director at Unilever, and an ex-president of Emrasai, and the author of the Amazon bestseller, Insightful INC, Manish brings a rare combination of strategic depth and cultural fluency. From decoding consumer persona to transforming insights into boardroom action, this conversation explores how to embed consumer empathy into the DNA of your business. This isn't just about research. It's about redefining how brands think, act, and grow. So let's dive in right into this. So now we have our very own Manish Makhijani. Welcome, Manish, to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Manish, before we start about Insightful INC, and I love reading the book because it has a lot of conversations in the example about how you encourage people to do the consumer connect.
Right.
But before we get into the Insightful INC, how about we know just a little bit about you?
So I'm Manish. I've been working in the industry for about 30 years now. I've spent a significant amount of that time in Unilever, working in India and in different parts of the world, with Unilever working on different categories and different brands. And I've loved each and every moment of that. And I'm working at RSPL now as a CEO.
Thank you so much, Manish. And since you've spent more than 3 decades into this industry, you've seen the consumer very closely. What exactly inspired you to write Insightful INC, which is talking about how consumer-centric organizations can be built upon?
Well, there were a few things going through my head actually when I was thinking about writing the book. One is that when I looked around, I realized that there were a lot of books on marketing, but there weren't enough books on insights. There are books on market research, yes, but those are books about the research of market process, the process of market research. There weren't books about how do you actually get to an insight in real life. And the marketing books talk a lot about how they got an idea and how they created an ad or a campaign or certain marketing activities. They don't necessarily elaborate what goes on behind the scenes.
Exactly.
So behind the glamorous world of marketing, there is a lot of gore and details that goes with where the insights people and the marketing people sort of roll up their sleeves and look at the data and look at the information, debate it out, speak to consumers, and sort of figure out what's the real insight. So I thought behind the scenes, if somebody were to show, that'll be an interesting side of the world to see. That's one. Second is that the spotlight has there has always been a lot of spotlight on marketeers. There are a lot of awards and there is recognitions and all of that. But I felt that there isn't enough spotlight on researchers and insights people necessarily.
That's true.
And the marketing and insights people work as two sides of the same coin. You can't be a good brand manager if you don't have insights about consumers around your brand.
Correct.
And if you're an insights manager, if you don't know what the brand is going to do or what does the brand stand for, you can't get the right insights. So therefore, there should be some spotlight on insights professionals as well, to sort of see what they actually do and the kind of things that they do to produce good marketing and which results in good business growths. So that was the thought really when I was thinking about it.
And I think majority of the bigger gaps that we always talk about within the organization is how a brand manager understands the brand versus how a researcher understands the brand. Was that the gap that it got filled because of this book and the citation that you have within the book?
No, I don't think the gap got filled because of the book. The book got written because we filled the gap in Unilever through lots and lots of efforts. So when you're calling a research agency does not necessarily have the full context of why you're doing what you're doing and what are you actually going to do with the research and what actually you did with the research when it was over. So the insights manager position was created in Unilever to bridge that gap. So that insights manager understands the full context of the brand and therefore can really look at what the research means and work with the brand team very closely to produce insights that make sense. So therefore that's a job which is very different from job that a research agency does. And you'll often find me saying that an insight manager's job begins when the research agency's job gets over. So you think you've done your job, you've done the presentation as an agency, but that's when the insight manager's job begins because that's when they start thinking about it and analyzing it and having conversations with the brand team saying, so what are we going to do? Does this make sense? Should we look at this? Should we look at that? And they mine the data extensively for next few years on that piece of research. So therefore, the job of an insights manager in an organization is quite different from that of a research agency. And I think the book tries to bring out that as well, saying if you're a research agency, you must know what an insight manager does because they're your clients. Equally, if you want to have a career in insights, then you should know what is it that takes. Or if you're a marketer, then you need to know what is it that insights people actually do and how do they produce the insight. So, book sort of tries to cover those angles, that from different angles, to give you a perspective.
So, considering that there's a data-driven practice that generally people do, and then there is an insight-led organization, what is that difference that people should be mindful of?
I mean, these are, to me, in my view, these are a lot of jargons in data-driven conversations versus insightful conversations. It's a bit of a jargon that needs to be sort of clarified in a way because they could mean one and the same thing or they could mean completely different things. It depends on how you look at that. So, data-driven conversation means that you look at the information and then decide. That's what it simply means. Now, people therefore think of data as quantitative data. People think of data as behavioral data, or they look at the big data that comes from digital ecosystems, and therefore you want to look at that and take a decision. But data-driven conversation is a mindset. It's about saying that am I looking at some information and deciding, or is the decision very subjective, without necessarily objective data? And that's a data-driven decision. So, and that doesn't stop at marketing alone. So, for example, if you're in supply chain and you're deciding whether your warehouse should have bots to pack the finished goods into cartons, will that increase efficiency? Now that efficiency, how much efficiency will it increase? How much will it benefit the business? And will it actually benefit the end consumer, or is it just an internal benefit? You can look at the data to decide that. It can be data-driven decision, but it's got nothing to do with the consumer. Consumer insights, on the other hand, focuses specifically on consumers, saying what do your consumers want? How much do they like your brand? And why do they like the brand? And why do they not like your products? And so on and so forth. Focus a lot more on consumer insights. And insights comes from data, yes. So therefore, for consumer insights, typically would look at lots and lots of data coming from different sources. You look at quantitative research, you look at qualitative research, you look at first-party data, you look at big data coming in. You do consumer connects, go and meet consumers, you go do some observations at homes, you will do some shop observations. And then you will sort of sit together and say, aha, this is the reason why he loved my deodorant, or he's not buying my deodorant, or this is the one she wants to buy my dishwash bar. So insights therefore comes from combining different data sources and joining the dots to arrive at an interesting take on understanding the consumer behavior and doing something with it as a business.
So whenever we collect the data, it says a different story. Do you match that story with other aspects of data collection, or probably just like you said, digitalized behavioral data is different than what we actually collect? To connect that dot, what all elements that you actually choose, and how do you map everything to get a result out of it?
So you need to look at. Let me draw an analogy. If you're driving a car, you're primarily looking at the front and trying to figure out whether the road is clear and how much is the traffic, so that you sort of drive accordingly, and you'll adjust the speed. But at the same time, you're also looking at the back view mirror, right? You're also looking at side mirror to see if something is coming on the side or not. And you're also looking at, if the air conditioning is comfortable, or you might be having a conversation on the phone via Bluetooth, hopefully, and not like this. Or you might be listening to music or chatting with somebody who's traveling with you. Now, you're doing lots and lots of those things, and all of them are different data points. But your brain is consolidating them, joining the dots, and telling you, yeah, drive this, slow down now, or you can speed up now, or it's getting too cold, so reduce the air conditioning. So So it's a bit like that. You look at the data from different perspectives, and every study gives you a different perspective. In the sense that you might look at shopping behavior, for instance, and then you might look at the behavior at home as to how she's actually using the product, and you might look at what is the response to advertising. Now these three are different pieces of data, but you connect the three to say that if I have to talk to her about my brand or my product, how is it that I should talk to her about? And you connect that, and the three might give you completely different answers because the three are talking about completely different things. But sometimes they also might conflict with each other. And instead of just shooing it away saying, no, this study doesn't match with that study, so one of the studies is wrong, and I think that study is wrong because I don't like the research agency, or I don't like the researcher, or I think the data collected was not right. Instead of rejecting one study saying it's contradicting the other one, often it's important to look at why there's a contradiction, because there might be an insight in the contradiction, you might be missing something. So I'll give you a simple example. If you are talking to women at home, let's say you're talking about hygiene and cleanliness, and you say that, how important is hygiene and cleanliness to you. Every respondent without fail will tell you, नहीं, घर साफ करना तो बहुत ज़रूरी होता है, मुझे तो साफ सफाई बहुत पसंद है. Which woman is going to tell you that मुझे गंदा घर चलता है? I'm okay with a dirty house. Nobody will tell you that. Everybody will tell you, नहीं, मैं तो साफ सफाई बहुत पसंद करती हूँ, गंदा घर मुझे पसंद नहीं है, मैं तो बहुत सफाई करती हूँ. Either she does it herself or has a help to do it. So everybody will tell you that. Now, whether how true is it, if you look around and you see a little bit of dirt under the sofa, or you see that actually the surfaces are a little dusty. Now she's saying that I like cleaning, but why is the surface dusty? Is she lying? Or is she saying something which is socially acceptable? That might be the case, because that's a contradiction there. Right? So, or maybe she's not lying at all. Maybe she doesn't, dust doesn't bother her. Maybe she doesn't think that level of dust is dusty enough, for her to start cleaning. So you to then figure out as to why is there a contradiction, or the hall is very clean. You go to the bathroom and you see that the bathroom is actually quite dirty. So why is it that she's kept the bathroom dirty while the hall is very clean? Why is she not bothered about a clean bathroom? What does that say about her mindset about cleanliness? What does it say about, how does she want to keep her house clean? So therefore, yes, data points might be contradicting, but it may not mean that one data is right and the other data is wrong. There might be an insight in the contradiction. And if you probe that a little further, if you connect the dots, you might land up in an interesting space which can take you to a different area.
So considering that, that's a very beautiful example. Do you actually go and probe these women? I'm just citing an example. Do you actually get that why answer until it is already solved or resolved? How do you do that? Because, of course, it could be, that social dilemma that I just wanted to say that my house is clean, whereas there's dust lying on the surface. So, not everybody comes out the way it should be, and we are not led into an assumption-based environment or insights.
Yeah.
So how you guys can go deep to find that, that's exactly what it means rather than...
So that's a skill that you need to develop over a period of time. So of course you probe till you understand the reason why, but you can't keep probing for hours and hours. You can't sort of torture the respondent. And also you have to probe very skillfully, because you don't want the respondent to be annoyed. The conversation will go for a toss completely. So for example, if I say that, अरे आपने तो बोला आपका घर पसंद, आपको साफ घर पसंद, ये धूल मिट्टी दिख रही है, she'll be pissed off and she'll throw you out of the house, and your conversation is ended. So you can't probe her like that. But then you have to try and understand, saying maybe this level of dust doesn't bother her. So then you ask other questions. For instance, you ask her saying, how often do you clean? Do you clean it yourself? Does a helper clean? How happy are you with the cleaning that happens? Etc., etc. When do you decide the house has become really dirty now, so I must clean it? You ask those questions to see that, maybe her level of sensitivity of the kind of dust that's acceptable is different. Because everybody has different levels of sensitivity. Maybe some level of dust is okay with her. So you need to understand that a little bit more instead of assuming that she's lying. Because a lot of people, that being a researcher so many years, that people don't say what they do and they don't do what they say. Because they're not really conscious of what the things they're doing. A lot of things happen through system one thinking.
Yes.
The brain. So therefore, you're not necessarily thinking. So if you probe, you'll only get rational answers. She actually doesn't know the answer. So instead you observe, saying, how does that actually happen? You ask her, you walk around the house, you look at different things, you sort of appreciate certain things, you see how the kitchen is kept. You will get a much better sense of what kind of a person is she. For example, I'll give you an idea. I'll give you a thought, which is, there is something called as hierarchy of pocha. There is a pocha ka kapda, which you clean house, right? So there is one kapda on which you use to sort of lift the bartan and keep it when you're cooking. So that's the cleanest one. And the dirtiest one is the one that you clean the floor with.
Yes.
And there are in-between ones, the one that you clean the surface with, one that you clean the bartan with, etc., etc. So there is a hierarchy of pocha. Now in that, therefore, and they are, if a woman is very, very particular about cleanliness, let's say she has 5 different cloths that she's using for different purposes, she would be washing them separately and she'll be drying them at separate places, because you don't want the pocha ka kapda to touch the food ka kapda, because that's a lot more dirty, and food kapda you don't want to be dirty. Now how is she washing them and how is she drying them, and whether she has 5 categories of kapdas or whether she has 2 or whether she has 11 tells you volumes about how much bothered she is about cleanliness. So if you walk around her house and look at her, while you're having a conversation with her in the Consumer Connect, you ask her about, what cloth is she using for cleaning, and if she'll explain to you. Whether she has 2 or 5 or 11 will tell you how bothered she is, and that itself will give you an insight. Then if she has only 2, you know that she's not that bothered about cleanliness. Therefore the dust on the floor dust on the surfaces is understandable, because her sensitivity of cleanliness is different from other people. So therefore she doesn't think it's dusty, and therefore that's okay for her. So that's how you resolve the contradiction. So you're not probing and asking questions कि आपने जो झूठ बोला आपका bathroom तो कितना dirty है. But you look around and get more data points about that person.
So Manish, one thing, this is you gave a very great explanation to this example. आपने कई बार you would have seen, when we do data collection for a particular project, specifically I'm talking about those studies which are on a trend level analysis which goes under. You've been doing a certain study for almost like 3 years. And all of a sudden, 4th year, the trend started to change. And then you go back and, question the agency as to why this trend is changing. Agency thinks that, they probably would have changed the provider.
PG definition, yeah.
It could be anything.
Yeah,
whereas the questionnaire has not changed at all, but something has changed, which is why the trends are changing. How do you incorporate those changes, and what are basically, the key areas that you actually look when those changes are
I'm not sure there's one simple answer to that, but I would say that first of all you need to check that actually there is no problem in fieldwork, and that you have gone to the right target respondent, which is same as before, you ask the right questions, and all of that is not a problem. You first need to establish that, because sometimes that may be a problem. Then you need to look at other factors. So for example, last year or year before last, I don't remember, a few years back, when Chennai got flooded with unusual rains. Now, obviously, the brand track fieldwork that had to happen for 2-3 weeks got disturbed. So the fieldwork didn't happen, or happened to a much smaller level. Now, when you see the data of those 3-4 weeks looks very different from the previous weeks, because the city was flooded. So I don't even know how the interviews were being done, and if the interviews are being done, you don't know what mindset were respondents in. So therefore, there were external factors that might have impacted this. So you need to look at those kind of factors, and if none of those explain, then you have to say that okay, it's a genuine finding. Something has changed. What has changed? Has somebody started advertising something dramatically different, which is making people think differently about my brand? Has some activation happened? Has some price change happened? Or whatever, or there might have been something in the market that could explain that. So I remember a long time ago, long before Unilever, for instance, I used to do brand track in one of the agencies, and I was doing a track for one of the, one of the stock trading companies, one of the stock trading brands. Udhar, we used to see that, and they used to advertise a lot to get more and more people to invest in stock market through their broking platform. We would see that, the spontaneous awareness and trial, number of people coming in and sort of joining that trading platform would go up and down, sort of randomly. And we would look at GRPs and what activities are they doing? Are they doing some sales activities on the ground? Nothing would explain. And then I suddenly put the stock market ka, Sensex ka graph next to the awareness graph and trial graph. It was matching so much. Oh. That's it. So the stock market is going up. A lot of people want to invest more and more. Market is going down. Less and less people want to invest. That simple thing explained awareness and the trial of that stock broking firm as the market is going up and down. So sometimes you need to look at those factors which may be related to the category.
But it probably be happening quite a number of times, because during even my career with market research, I've seen many times client complains about the fact that the data has driven from A point to B point, and we are not able to find out that solution.
Yeah.
And considering what you just mentioned, it has a lot of depth to look into it.
Yeah.
Whether that gets resolved over a period of time, or do you as a client would accept that data that the trends have changed and we are still not able to find it out? Let's go with this and see the another.
Yeah,
trend.
Correct. I mean, you obviously put a lot of time and effort to understand why the discrepancy is and whether there's an insight. But if you don't find it, you move on saying, okay, there was something wrong, but you record that. And then see in the future if the same thing happens, is that a glitch that is happening? Or if that's happening consistently, every 3-4 months you see a glitch, then maybe there's a problem, you probe again. But yeah, you've got to move on and say, okay, there are some things random, which you can't explain at all. So that's okay.
Now I'll take you back to that same hierarchy of the pochas wala conversation. I remember the conversation we used to have long back when we used to work with brands, and there was a time when I used to go out and fill the questionnaire as an interviewer, and then there was a time when we actually moved beyond demographic actionable items to a consumer persona items. How does that has actually changed, and what approach has actually made consumer persona led insights to an organization versus a demographic actionable insights?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I have mixed views on that. Yes, personas are used extensively to sort of not just to do research, but to create brands and to create advertising, particularly for advertising. So if you're the persona that you just described, which is a woman in her 30s, for example, who's urban, educated, and working and outgoing, says a certain personality. So therefore, the kind of brands that will appeal to her, the way you talk to her about lipstick, for example, or the way you talk to her about a dishwash bar, for that matter, or laundry, would be different from somebody who's a woman who's a housewife,
correct,
who's not that outgoing and who's mostly at home. There are two different personas. So the way you talk to them are very different, and the insights that you have about how they choose product categories is very, very different. So yes, that's extremely useful when you're creating advertising, when you're creating brand positioning. However, they also look pretty good on PowerPoint. Implementing them in real life is very difficult. Because one is they all watch the same media, they all watch the same TV channels, and digital reach, etc., might be equally high. So targeting them in real life is very, very difficult. So on PowerPoint, I'm targeting a 30-year-old woman, urban, professional, outgoing woman, but my ad might be seen by somebody who's quite different from her, even on digital or on TV. So personas by targeting is not very easy. Yes, of course, your Metas and Googles will collect enough data about her and will start saying that probably she's this kind of a persona, probably she's that kind of a persona. They'll give you a probabilistic model and you do that. But it's still not as good as it looks on the PowerPoint is one problem. Second problem is that if you look at the behavior, now, annoyingly enough, the behavior of two very different personas in terms of consumption, purchase and consumption of a category might be very similar. So then you're like, what's the point of it all? Because both of them are buying the same brand of lipstick, buying it as often, spending as much money. So why am I talking to an outgoing woman and not to the woman who's at home, for instance? Then what's the point? So, but creatively it might be a point because you're the kind of brand that you create, advertising that you can, maybe for her versus her. But behaviorally, if everybody is the same, then what's the point of persona? So there is a bit of a disillusion that has set in over the years on how useful the personas really are, and the amount of time and effort you spend in creating them and trying to reach out to them. You realize behavior to zyala farak hai nahi, so what's the point? So I think therefore the world has started moving a lot more towards behavioral segmentation rather than persona psychographic segmentation, which leads to a persona. Saying that I will go to loyal, high consumers, medium consumers, light consumers, or loyal consumers, or infrequent consumers, or I will go to consumers who tend to buy a lot more from e-com rather than those who buy from general trade, or I'll go to consumers who buy a lot more frequently, those who don't buy frequently, stuff like that, because that's a lot more actionable, and that's a lot more measurable as well, because you can measure it, saying, okay, I'm going to focus on e-com, people who buy it on e-com, on the purchase occasion that they buy from e-com, so I'm going to sell it on e-com, this SKU or this price, and then you can start seeing whether it's growing or not growing. Or I will focus on, only on general trade in these geographies, and then see people who are buying from general trade, then what can I do? Because anyway, most FMCG purchase and consumption happens through system one. People are not consciously thinking. So the responses she's giving me in the surveys is anyway a very rationalized response, which sometimes she may not even know why she's saying what she's saying. So then behavioral makes a lot more sense, behavioral segmentation and behavioral profiling, and implementing that is much easier, tracking that is much easier than personas. And so I think there's a lot of change in that space, and I think therefore, if you can combine personas and behavior, then that's even better. But just the behavioral segmentation makes a lot of sense.
I think the behavioral part and the psychographic part is something which has been already been there for years and years, and we still believe, even considering that internet era, lots of things are changing, and people are becoming biased to what they actually see before they actually make a judgment. So you're right. It's all about system one, how they actually react.
Yeah.
Consumer personas I've lately come up, and I've been catching a lot of attention.
Yeah.
First, I believe that it is because we're doing a certain tracking. We really wanted to name a certain segment with that name, so we keep ourselves recalling that this is what they actually believe in.
Yeah.
And they might change over a period of time.
Yes.
Should we change the name or not? It's something that question can come later on. But again, as a traditional researcher, I would always believe that the behavioral content would give you or the insights would give you better approach to understand your consumer than just defining a consumer persona.
Yeah. So therefore, if persona is defined by the behavior or is linked to the behavior, then it makes a lot more sense. Otherwise, it just becomes too theoretical.
So,
is all I'm saying. So now with the digital data, with the big data, getting the consumption on the behavioral data about people is much easier, and you got a lot more data. So therefore, creating personas using the behavior is a lot more easier now than it used to be. So then it is more meaningful, yes. So, for example, when do I buy a shampoo on Quick.com versus when do I buy it from a modern trade versus when do I buy it from general trade? So if I've run out of a shampoo, for example, and my monthly purchase cycle hasn't come about, then I will order it on a Quick.com. Let's say that's the purchase cycle. So it's more of a top-up buy. So I'll say that I'm going to focus my shampoo brand of this SKU on the top-up purchase that they do on Q-com. So I'll have it available at this price on the quick commerce, so that I'm tapping into the quick commerce. Now, women of different personas would be, some personas will be more inclined to do shopping on quick com, some will be less inclined to shopping on quick com. Therefore, you're targeting personas which are more inclined to do a top-up shopping on quick com by default. But your lead-in is a behavioral targeting rather than a persona targeting. And you say that women who are okay to buy on Quick.com and willing to pay a certain price for convenience is my target audience. And this is how that woman looks like, and this is what her demographics look like, so that I can target her accordingly.
And in a way, I'm actually finding a problem to give a solution basis on the behavioral aspects
Yes.
of a consumer, rather than just thinking that, if I define a certain consumer persona, it may not solve any problem as
It may not solve a problem. So, for example, if you start with the persona, you will say that convenience seekers versus value for money seekers, versus those who find the
Economical
shopping very
buyers.
pleasurable, for example. So convenience, value for money, and pleasurable shopping is what you start. And see, convenience Q-com, because she wants convenience, so she'll order from e-com and Q-com. Therefore, I'll target her. Now, the thing is that those who find shopping to be pleasurable also want convenience at certain points in time. Right? So it's not like the personas are watertight. So therefore, starting with behavioral and then creating personas around that, to me, makes a lot more sense.
And Manish, that's one another aspect, since you mentioned about different personas and the behavioral aspect, that goes into basically defining what business strategy a company needs to use to understand consumer, or even before that. If I really have to say focus on building a new product, and we take the same example that we used to, finding the need to building a product. There are different business strategies which go under, and aligning this with an incentive. Insights. There's many other commercial aspects that needs to be balanced. So how an organization, citing from your own book, how does an organization who's leading towards becoming a consumer-centric organization also balance the commercial imperatives which comes along with balancing these two as well?
I think this is a wrong way of looking at it, is how I would say in the first place, because you're running a business for the consumer. So therefore, you must understand what is the need that she has that you're going to satisfy, whether through existing products or a new product that you have. So you may develop a new product work stream, or you may exist product. So you exist because of the consumer. So if you need to understand what need she has and how best can I satisfy that need, is why you need consumer insights in the first place, because your business is based on that. So therefore, understanding consumers and designing the products according to that is not an expense that you have to incur in order to grow the business. No, it's not an expense. It is an investment. So if you stop looking at it, market research and insights, as a cost, but look at it as an investment, like you tend to do for R&D, for example, or advertising, saying I need to invest in advertising for a few months before it starts showing returns, or I need to have R&D capability, so that's an investment. So if you look at insights as an investment, because that will give you an idea of what best products should you have and launch in the market, then it doesn't look like a cost at all. Then there is no need of balancing. Then investment, you look at it very different perspective, saying how much investment do I need to give and when will it start bearing fruits, right? And then you look at it from different perspective, saying, okay, okay to invest this one.
But that's something
the whole mindset changes.
But that's something you probably be defining when you're designing the strategy for anything, developing a new product or using the existing one.
Even for the existing ones. So for example, if I am managing, Dove shampoo, for instance, I might be developing Dove body lotion, which is a new NPD that I'm doing, new product development that I'm doing. But on Dove shampoo, I need to figure out saying, what advertising should I do? What pricing should I offer? Should I be available on quick commerce, or should I not be available on quick commerce? Should I go to GT, or should I be only empty? So for existing businesses, you need insights as well. Saying what should my pricing be? What SKU should I have? What is the channel and what is the trade? What sort of incentive scheme should I have for my consumers? And so on and so forth. For that, you need insights which are equally powerful and for the business as well. Now, therefore, you need investment there. Saying I'm going to I want to monitor saying where are people buying my product and therefore where should I make it available so that I can make my availability accordingly. So that's an investment. If you look at it as a cost, then you say, okay, save the cost, minimize the cost. लगा दो सारे दुकानों पे देखो कहाँ बिकता है हम वहीं पे बेचना शुरू करेंगे. Do you see what I mean?
That's exactly.
So therefore the thing is that the question, if the question is being asked, then the mindset is wrong because you're looking at it as a cost and therefore you'll try and cut it as much as possible. But if you say it's an investment because I need to understand the consumer because I'm making the product for her and therefore it's an investment, then things start looking very differently. Then you start putting monies behind it quite differently from versus seeing it as a cost.
And that's brought me to another question because you mentioned different personas, you mentioned different aspects of consumer, the way you look at it, and you've already led teams across the different markets. And there's always a cultural shift that one market has on the other. We just mentioned about the name in itself changes, but the product doesn't.
Yeah.
So how does thing actually gets managed by a researcher, and what is that universal thing which remains the same?
Interesting question. So I think I've lived in 4 different countries and worked across different categories pretty much across the world. In Latin America, in the North America, Europe and Asia, of course. And you see lots and lots of fundamental differences in the consumers, cultural differences across the world. There's a very, very good book called The Geography of Thought that elaborates that very, very beautifully based on a lot of research, saying how the Asian consumers are different from Western consumers. And I've seen that in real life. That I read that book a long time ago. So I've seen that playing out in real life, in front of my eyes, and it's fascinating to see. So generally speaking, I'm generalizing here, but generally speaking, if you look at Europeans, they tend to be a lot more individualistic. Our Asian culture is a lot more affiliative.
Yes.
We think about our context, we think about, why are we doing, where are we doing, what will my family think, what will my friends think, etc. A lot more. Whereas they tend to be individualistic. I'm generalizing, like I said. But that difference, therefore, makes a difference in the way they live, in the way they behave, the way they buy products, and the way they consume products. Now, we are starting at the other end where we're looking at the consumption, saying, inka consumption behavior is different from unka consumption behavior. Oh, that's because that's a Western market. Wahan pe to bade products, big pack size products sell. Yahan pe sachets or smaller pack size sell. Now, but why do they sell? Has that got something to do with the culture? So I actually wrote a paper for SOMAR, I think back in 2008, 2009, saying how the Asian economies, when they evolved, they will never look like the Western economies in terms of consumption. Culturally, we are very, very different than them. So I'll give you an example. The implications of being an individualistic is that, let's say I decided that this kind of shampoo suits my hair. I like a shampoo which gives me soft skin. My hair is a little, my head is a little dry, for instance. If I have dry skin, so this shampoo suits me. It makes my hair, softer. So I like that shampoo. Once she has decided that she'll stick to that shampoo because she's experimented, she stick to it. It doesn't matter what everybody else is using. It doesn't matter what advertising they're showing. She's very unlikely to be swayed by that. And therefore, you will see that one brand of shampoo she will use and she'll buy a larger bottle so that she can consume it. In India, we would say that, people want to keep using different products. Oh, ye naya product aaya hai. Kareena Kapoor is showing that. I want to try that. Oh, but this is an anti-dandruff shampoo. I need to use that once in a week. Oh, but I'm going for a date today, so I want to use this shampoo which makes my hair a lot more bouncy. So she will use 3 or 4 different shampoo brands. Maybe not at one point in time, but over a year, she will have 3 or 4 brands. So the repertoire of brands is higher in India and generally in Asia than Western markets because she's like, I want to use, on a date, I want to use a different shampoo. I want to use a shampoo that Kareena Kapoor is using. I want to use anti-dandruff as well. She will not take it, this is the one that suits me, I will use it. She will use for different occasions. So therefore, the repertoire of brands is higher, generally speaking, than in Western markets. But also the result is that, if I'm going to use 4 different brands of shampoo, I'm not going to buy large bottles of all of them. I'll buy smaller pack sizes. So smaller pack sizes, sachets and smaller bottles, etc. are big not only because they offer much better value for money, but also because it allows me to have 4 different brands of shampoo instead of having just one. So even as we have more money, as we become a developed economy, or per cap GDP goes up, we're never going to start behaving like Europeans because we are different people fundamentally and therefore the consumption is different. So, there are a lot of differences, therefore, across the world in how people consume and how do they buy, etc. But there is a lot of similar, we are all human beings, so there are universal emotions. There are lots and lots of universal emotions which are the same. For example, the notion of love, the notion of romance, the notion of wanting to look after the family, the notions of masculinity, the notions of femininity, etc., are pretty similar because those are universal human truths. And therefore, global brands usually try and identify one insight which is universally true and sort of base a brand on that, so that I don't have to change my brand positioning and advertising across the world. I base just on that, so there is universal insight. You will execute it differently. For example, again, I wrote a paper on love and romance, I think for SOMAR in 2010 or something, on how the notions of love and romance are different across the world and how they are actually similar. In what aspects are they similar, what aspects are they different? And you'll find a very, very similar thing. So you may execute it differently in India or China, Indonesia versus what you do in Germany versus US or Brazil. The ad will look and feel different, but the insight will be fundamentally the same. So there are a lot of universal emotions as well.
So Manish, taking back to that head and shoulder wala example that you just mentioned, and I remember I've read somewhere, why India do a lot of sachets versus the Western countries. They don't do that. And one reason which I still remember is that, we do a lot of traveling. We really wanted to keep those sachets, and you also mentioned, different sachets. Sometimes it is like, I am a very hardcore head and shoulder user. And I really want, that 2-liter bottle in my bathroom. Along with, if I'm traveling, I carry sachets. I don't have to worry about. But why the same thing doesn't happen in the Western? Because they are more avid travelers than us.
Yeah. So clearly travel is not the reason. So clearly travel is not the reason why we use sachets, right? We use sachets because they offer value for money. So the brands use sachet because it gives you accessibility. We can be present in shops across the country. My distribution can be higher and my penetration of the brand can increase very rapidly. So 10 rupees ka sachet, obviously it started with 1 rupee and 50 paise ka sachets. But today if you look at 5 rupees ka ya 10 rupees ka sachet is a much lesser amount of money for a consumer to commit. And she will buy that and keep coming back to me again and again. So they offer